Want to know what you're fighting for? Podcast by George. 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 Oh, yeah.
Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome on into another podcast by George. As always, thank you to the PBG singers there, as I call them. Those little girls are 5 years older almost than when they first did that. So they're young ladies now, but I still like to use that once in a while. It makes me laugh. I mean, I love it every time I get a chance to play it, folks. I don't love what we're going to be talking about today because I'm getting the heebie-jeebies. You know, I get out on the window ledge when it comes to climate change. This stuff is freaking me out. And we got to get our good buddy, our good pal, Dr. Jerry Schnoor, back on the podcast by George live line to talk about it. I hope that you saw the thumbnail, the promo that I used. This is what I think, and I'm sure he agrees. It's just a matter of how much and how long, when, whatever. The climate crisis, you've been hearing a lot about it lately. It's going to get worse. That's the point that I try to make to folks. It's not going to get better, at least short term anyway. Does it have the potential to get better? Can we do something? Yeah, maybe. I don't know. We're going to talk to him today, folks. He's coming back on the podcast by George live line, Dr. Jerry Schnoor. He's at the University of Iowa. He teaches civil and environmental engineering, as well as occupational and environmental health. He's our guy when it comes to all things climate. His specific fields of knowledge include water quality, modeling, aquatic chemistry, and climate change. And this morning, I'm just delighted to say he's back on the podcast by George live line. So let me take that off the screen, click a couple of buttons here and see if we can work the magic of the internet and say good morning to Dr. Schnoor. Hi, Doc.
Hi, George. Good to see you.
Yeah, my big three on the PBG, as I say always, is climate, war, and healthcare. And it's in that order because I think, one of these is going to get us sooner or later. And again, it's the timing issue. Is it 20 years for climate? Don't know. Is it 20 minutes for war because of the nuclear component? Yeah, maybe. And of course, healthcare factors into both of those. But I wanted to bring this up on screen as kind of a funny ha-ha way to begin, but kind of not. This is something that we're seeing a lot on the internet now, a lot of weather-related stuff that's very dramatic. People are having a lot of success on YouTube in particular doing these weather shows. And I don't begrudge them that. They're using these very colorful looking maps. This is from a guy called the Weatherman Plus. Here's how he's referring to the Midwest right now with a ring of fire. And you can see the tornado potential and the arrows and the colors and all that kind of stuff. And this guy, he's particularly interesting, Doc, because he ends each one of his shows with a prayer and he talks to Yahweh at the end of his show. It just scares the crap out of me. But again, that's weather, current weather, as opposed to climate. But I guess the question for you is, getting in the Wayback Machine, and you and I have been around a while. Let's go back 40 years, let's say. Would these people have been able to have done this would the weather maps have reflected the type of craziness that they're showing now to get eyeballs on the internet? Has this always been around, or is this something new? I'm talking about these extreme crazy weather maps and weather instances.
Well, I guess, we've had extreme weather always, but the question is, how extreme is the extreme weather? And it's getting more extreme and it's getting more frequent. So that's the difference, George. I guess, qualitatively, maybe nothing is different. We've always had wildfires. We've always had floods, and always will probably. But the frequency of them and the magnitude, the severity, that's what's changed.
Well, we've got the magnitude and the severity in the daily news, and that's causing some increase in interest in the climate catastrophe. They're telling us not climate change, not climate crisis, climate catastrophe. That's what's happening. But I wanted to pick off a couple of things here that are topical right off the hop here. Here's one that comes to mind now. My wife actually was perusing public television this week, and believe it or not, on a very popular show, I'm not going to name names here, because it was a guest, and this guy took off and started talking about he believes that the climate issues, the weather that we're experiencing are because of this. Climate change is driving higher temperatures, not a volcanic eruption. But this guy was saying, he was talking about the volcanic eruption. climate change is the major driver of this year's extreme temperatures, not the eruption last year of an underwater volcano near Tonga in the Pacific Ocean. Scientists were telling The Hill this. Now, while the eruption of the volcano may be an aggravating factor, the scientists say it is not having the impact attributed to it by conservative commentators who have downplayed the role of climate change. Scientists told The Hill the eruption should not be used to undercut the influence of climate change on this year's heat wave. It's probably fair to say the influence of the volcano on this year's extremes is quite small, said Stuart Jenkins, author of a paper that discussed the eruption. Okay, let me take that off the screen because I don't know. Is this moving around in climate circles, Doc? Is this just conservative, ookie kabuki stuff? Is the volcano in Tonga causing climate change? Is that real or not?
No, that's not real. The largest volcano in our lifetime was the 1991 Mount Pinatubo eruption in the Philippines. And that we could see a significant cooling for about 2-3 years in Earth's weather, climate, over that 3-year period. And so generally, the role of volcanoes is to cool the climate, not warm it.
Yeah, because they send a plume into the air, they can cause clouds and cause, I don't know. But just FYI, that is moving around out there in the conservative ecosphere. Let me bring this up on screen because this is what I'm getting to. This is where I'm out on the window ledge. This is the Plan A website. They say, is it too late to save our planet? It says it will be if we keep asking if it is. Now, the doc knows this all too well because he's played a role in this IPCC thing in the past. In a 2018 report by the IPCC, it was stated that 12 years are left to turn the fight against climate change around. Other sources quoted the much more stringent deadline of 18 months. And some bleaker minds say it's already too late to fight the effects of climate change. And yet other analyses point out numerous thresholds and therefore cannot give a precise doomsday deadline. So how much time is left to save our planet, really? That's the question I've got. Is there an actual tipping point to our planet? Whether you call it global warming, the Anthropocene, and I think of the great Rory Verrata, he was on my show talking about that, or climate crisis, humans are not programmed for long-term slow crises. We just know how to think and or run real fast when chased by an angry grizzly bear. But climate change is coming at humans from a deadly angle, the slow burn angle. Right, this says we've saved the planet before. I'm not going to read that, Doc, but I know that you're familiar with this. What they're talking about here is going back to the 70s and 80s, and you were involved in this too, and it had to do with the hole in the ionosphere or something like that because of aerosols and all that, and we appear to have defeated that. But I look at that and say, you're kind of wanting to, it's apples and oranges. That was completely different. It was something that didn't affect everyone's overall lifestyle, as an example. A lot of people weren't aware of it. A lot of people weren't aware of it when it got solved. So I don't think that applies to today. What's your take on it?
Well, it applies in the sense that it was intergovernmental, academia, industry, governments all were involved in coming to an agreement to limit the freon chemicals, the ones that were in refrigerators and micro blowing agents for microelectronics. And so it was a big deal, but it was a very small set of industries that were affected. And as you say, we have turned it around, but even now there's still an ozone hole. We haven't completely solved it yet. And that shows that since the Montreal Protocol, where we adopted that, was in 1988, it shows how many decades it takes to change these atmospheric phenomena. So even now we're just leveling it off, 40 years later. And that's true for climate change too. As you said, when people say we only have 12 years left, they're talking about 12 years left to meet the IPCC or the Paris Agreement goal of not allowing our global average temperature to become more than 2 degrees Celsius. That's about 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit warmer. That's a lot, averaged over the whole planet over all the seasons. So that's what they're talking about with only 12 years left, or now it would be something like 8 years left. But the truth is, George, this thing just keeps getting warmer, 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 warmer. So it's never too late to act. The later that we act, the warmer it's going to get. The sooner that we act, the more warming we can stave off.
Yeah, let's bring this up on screen here because this graphically illustrates it. Now, this is one of these charts that kind of, an academic like the doc, he can look at that and zoom right in. It's tough for me. But here's what I can do, because I was alive. I go down here to 1960. I mean, I was just a tadpole. But look at 1960 on the bottom of this chart. Then 1980, look at that. I remember that very well. Oh, boy. Tell us what we're seeing here as far as a trend is considered, Doc. This looks bad.
You raise a good point, because in 88, you might remember we had a terrible hot summer in 1988, and we began to really think about climate change. And the 80s were when the signal broke out of the noise. The climate is variable, and in the 80s it's warmer than the 70s. And the 90s warmer than that, and the 2000s, and so on and so on. The worry now is that yellow area, the effect of El Nino right now, plus our human-made greenhouse gases, which are increasing the climate temperature. It might throw us into this yellow area where instead of increasing about 1/3 of a degree Fahrenheit each decade, we could be increasing much more than that, even 1/2 or even 1 degree Fahrenheit every decade. So that's what's scary about this particular plot. The yellow area shows the increasing global average temperature over the future decades.
Without getting too far into academia, because I'm not very good at academics, but Rory Verato, as I mentioned him briefly, he's a fellow academic of yours, and he studied the climate deeply. He's one of these people that talks about the Anthropocene, I think it's pronounced. Now, we don't want to get into that too much, but his belief or what he would say is we're not going back to the way that it was. We're in this at this point. Now, we can maybe prevent things from getting extinction level, maybe. But for anybody that thinks that things are going to return to normal by themselves, or that we're going to do anything now to return to normal, that's probably not happening. Now, he's a little gloomy about all that, Doc. Do you agree with that analysis?
Well, the Anthropocene, has to do with geologic ages, and we are changing the fossil record right now because we're extincting so many species. So that can't be, undone. Once species are gone, they're gone. And that changes the fossil record, and that'll change the geologic period that we're known for. So I agree. But on the other hand, the certain things that are happening to us are reversible, including the average temperature of the Earth, the average temperature of the oceans. Even sea level rise is reversible, but that one is on a really long time scale of thousands of years to replace the ice that's melting now.
I encourage everybody to ask questions and, even just comment. I want to bring this up. This is a friend of the podcast, Debbie Lane. She says, how do we combat the climate deniers, Dr. Schnoor? Is seen recently with our meteorologist, Chris Gloninger. I'm sure that he's aware of that. They're out there. What's the best argument, or what's the point that you make if you only have to make one point to try to persuade climate deniers to think again, Doc?
Well, just that the data, the evidence is immense, and it's taken from space, from our spacecraft, that the Earth is warming. It's taken from buoys in the ocean, that the oceans are warming. It's taken from land-based measurements, thousands of stations, and it's being evaluated by thousands of scientists all over the world with no axe to grind, and therefore the evidence is beyond beyond preponderance of evidence. There's no doubt.
Well, thanks for the question, Debbie. This would remind me of some folks that you and I both know that climate deniers a lot of times are science deniers. I just think back to your childhood. Think of the people that were asleep in the back of the class instead of paying attention. I mean, you're not going to do anything to change that. That die was cast, 30, 40, 50 years ago. That's kind of the way that I look at it. I don't know how to combat that, and I don't know if we should maybe even be trying. But here's something that I did want to get to, because this is when I think of Dr. Jerry Schnoor, he was the first guy that brought this up on my show. I hadn't considered it. It's a huge deal now, and it's going to get bigger. And it goes to the bottom line, the almighty buck when it comes to this climate thing. How do we get something done? When will people start to pay attention? Dr. Schnoor said several years ago on my show, think insurance, Doc.
That's right. Uninsurable is what we're seeing right now. In California and Florida, you can't get new bundled homeowners insurance against floods and fires. And they're going to start to not renew other ones too, because they're losing money, George. That's the problem. And as soon as they're losing money, even locally, I think we're going to talk about it. Our local insurance companies, county by county, also losing money. Well, they can't exist, and then the reinsurance companies are losing money. That's the ones who insure the insurance companies. And because of that, things become uninsurable. And once they're uninsurable, my son lives in the hills behind Monterey, California. Beautiful place. But he's already had to evacuate twice. And he's now on special government subsidized insurance because he can't get regular insurance for fire for his home. And if that dries up, then he's got to leave. That's when uninsurable becomes uninhabitable. And when he leaves, he won't be able to sell his house because you can't get insurance. So it takes all your wealth away.
Yeah, wealth, that's what we're all about. It's stuff. That's what people want first and foremost. And of course, the other thing of it is, once you get your stuff, you want to go live someplace like California. No, Hawaii. Did you see Maui? Florida. Have you seen the hurricanes? All of these, unless you want to live in the flatlands of Nebraska or South Dakota or something like that. And I don't even know if they're going to become uninsurable, but that's what we're talking about, folks. You can't live in these places because your insurance company won't bundle. I think that's like if you have your car insurance with them, they'll insure your home. Nah, they'll have your auto insurance, but they ain't going to insure your house because it's in a fire zone, for God's sake, or a flood zone. Okay, let's go through these slides, Doc. The Big Sur wildfire, California, January 2022. The Camp Fire 2018 cost $10 billion in insurance losses. And yeah, that's what we're talking about.
$10 billion they lost on the Camp Fire. And of course, 81 lives too. That was the one in Paradise and near Santa Rosa, California, Northern California. It just keeps on going. I threw in Big Sur because that's very near where my son lives, and thinking about him, George.
Yeah, and this being America and who we are, what's going to create a change? Those 81 lives that were lost? Nah, that's always going to be a footnote. Maybe that $10 billion will. I mean, that's who we are, folks. Extreme events, breaking records, atmospheric rivers in Cali. What is that? What's an atmospheric river, Doc?
That's just, they used to call it the Pineapple Express. It comes from roughly over by Hawaii. Just lots of evaporation from the ocean forms a moisture cloud that comes right over to California and dumps huge amounts of rain. After the forest fires, it's prone to erosion and mud and mudslides, and that's part of the uninsurance. Montecito, California, down by Santa Barbara, is a case in point.
And then Hurricane Ian in Florida, 2022. A shout out to Dr. William Gallus at Iowa State University, a friend of the show. He was on here, and he had a forecast that was spot on with that thing. Again, very early. And a lot of those people in that area, Fort Myers Beach and so on, they didn't believe the forecast because some of the prior hurricane forecasts had kind of gone bust. But I got to believe they're believers now. I had Dan Allers, a Fort Myers Beach City councilman, on the show. He was on the second story of a home with water coming up. He didn't evacuate. I mean, yeah, it was. So those folks are definitely Dan Allers. I got to circle back with him someday. He's a believer. Now, here's something, Doc, that you provided that I wanted to talk about, because I'm shocked and amazed and dismayed that more people aren't concerned about this. My God, my wife can't walk out of the house without a mask on. She chokes and gags people that have asthma and all that. This is something that's affecting us. And you think, boy, this will wake people up. This will make people want to do something. But so far, not so much, Doc.
Well, your viewers may be interested, George, in that Canada is warming roughly 2 times faster than the rest of the planet. So it's going to just get worse and worse and worse, because it's warming so much faster than everybody else. There's going to be more wildfires there, and you can see it. It spans the entire country from west to east, and now just last week, the Yellowknife area, the capital of the Northwest Territories, right on a huge lake, they had to evacuate the entire town, 20,000 people.
My God. And my concern, maybe it's not viable, but I look at that and say, if we burn up we don't need less trees. We don't need more trees burned because of these carbon emissions we need more trees. So I don't know, is that a concern or not? Yeah?
Well, yeah, I'm a big proponent we should just be massively reforesting all around the world. And there is some going on in Africa, in China, Mongolian desert, trying to hold it back from Beijing. But we have to increase that, and it's the most cost-effective insurance for us against climate change that we have, George.
And this, again, is affecting so many people, and it's not going to go away anytime soon. It's like all of these things. It's human nature to believe that, again, because we're running from the grizzly bear, that we're going to outrun it and that things are going to be fine again. But if this is an issue, it's going to continue to be one. All right, this is something that I had on my show last week. Lahaina, Maui, the Hawaii wildfire in August 2023. And Doc's got a slide up there that we can see. Well, I want to play this. This is, and he may not have seen this. This is some drone footage that was provided to the Animal Rescue League people out there that I spoke to. This guy he came up on Maui in a boat because you couldn't get there on foot because of the wildfires. And he was able to launch a drone offshore from a boat, and this is what it looks like. We'll bring this up on screen, and Doc can comment about the significance of Lahaina out there in Maui. Here it goes. It'll start to move there. There we go. So it's going to sweep around with a drone here. This is, from a news reporting standpoint, an excellent use of a drone, because reporters and observers aren't able to get in with their cameras to see this. But this guy could come up in a boat and go over Lahaina. This is I can't look at it and not be shocked, Doc. This looks like the atom bomb photos and stuff that we saw out of Japan in 1945.
Yeah, it's just incredible. And you think of the people trapped there on that highway, the main road there along the ocean. Wow, what destruction I've never seen before.
Well, and the other thing about it is, I'm still waiting for the other shoe to drop. Now, you may not have any particular insight on this either, but they've talked about, as you know, I think the death toll now is over 100. They still have 700-800 people unaccounted for. I mean, are those going to be fatalities? Are those people going to be found? Are we going to push 1,000 people dead maybe in Lahaina from this wildfire? That would be by far and away the worst fire death toll in the United States, maybe one of the worst in the world ever. My God, I think this story could get a hell of a lot worse, Doc.
I really don't know, George. I pray that those people, you know, there's still cell towers down and they still have communication problems. I'm hoping that that's not the case, but they're now going through the commercial and rental buildings, apartments, and they'll probably find more deaths.
My God. And of course, when this news first broke, the climate deniers were all over it. They were saying, it's always dry in Maui this time of year. It's always windy. They always have wildfires. This can always happen. This isn't because of climate. But I think you might disagree with that.
I do. Again, it's more frequent and it's more severe. That's what the climate, the increased warming has done to our, what would be normal weather events.
Yeah, that's the that's the way of the world today. Okay, a couple of news hits here. Let's bring this up, and we got to be mindful of the doc's time here because, folks, it's another school season now that's coming up here. We got to get the doc on his way here very shortly. But this was in Common Dreams. I follow them very closely, and Maui advocates demand climate accountability from Biden during his visit there. And this was written when Biden was visiting Maui to survey the damage from catastrophic wildfires. Climate advocates and community leaders demanding bold action from Biden, including a national climate emergency declaration, which would unlock executive powers to aggressively combat the crisis. The Maui fires, which claimed the lives of more than 100 residents, and I think it could be more. God, like the doc says, let's pray that that's not so. Destroyed hundreds of homes and displaced thousands of residents, are the latest in a string of extreme weather disasters fueled by climate change that have impacted communities across the country this summer. Advocates are urging Biden to halt new fossil fuel leasing and exports, ramp up clean energy manufacturing, and direct funding to build climate resilience in vulnerable communities. Now, this goes on with some comments there from the local residents. That's too lengthy for me to read, I think. Declaring an emergency would align with the 74% of Democrats and 52% of all Americans who believe we are facing a climate emergency. According to 2021 polling, it would also send a strong signal that the administration is taking decisive action in the face of worsening extreme weather. Now, this paragraph here, the highlighting is mine. These deadly fires also renew focus on Maui's ongoing legal battle. I didn't know that. To hold fossil fuel companies accountable. In 2020, the county sued Exxon, Chevron, BP, Shell, and others for knowingly causing climate change damages, including increased wildfire risk. Yeah, that was going on. The complaint details Big Oil's responsibility for increased frequency, intensity, and destructive force of wildfires on Maui due to hotter, drier conditions. It also outlines sea level rise, flooding, extreme heat, and other climate issues. Maui's still fighting to get its case to trial after years of fossil fuel company efforts to delay and dismiss the lawsuit, and leading advocates in the fight to hold Big Oil accountable, calling for Biden to use the trip to support that lawsuit by declaring this emergency. And one of the main takeaways from there, Doc, is, I think of water in particular. You spent your life studying that because of the extreme heat, the climate change, global warming, and that type of things. But just the heat itself creates a much greater potential for wildfires for anybody that's living in a forested area, a grassland area, or even in a city with a lot of wooden structures and that type of thing. We're all becoming at risk for this.
Yes, and as we said, Canada's 2 times warmer rate of warming than we are here in the lower 48, and it's just going to get worse. We're going to have to bury the power lines more than the heat from fossil fuels when we burn them. It's the power lines, sparking the capacitors, sparking and causing these. But we're going to have to bury everything at great cost, and that's because it's a tinderbox.
Yeah, and here's Debbie Laneback. She says, as someone who goes there every year, she's talking about Maui, it's clear to see changes to the island year over year. And, I didn't think about it. I mean, you think of Hawaii, you think about earthquakes, you think about volcanoes, you think about tsunamis. I mean, they're in the news because of these types of things. I didn't think about them being at such risk because of wildfires, but it's a volcanic based island or whatever. They've got these mountain ranges with these down slopes and these winds that whistle down these slopes. They're a great risk for something like this happening there and elsewhere in those Hawaiian Islands, Doc.
Good point. The risks, I guess, aren't distributed uniformly. I don't know. What do you think, George? Is everybody going to want to move to Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan, where, the Great Lakes are 20% of the world's fresh water.
Yeah.
They might start to look at those cold states quite differently.
And shout out. Now, I got some relatives that are going to be watching this. They moved. They got another home now. That they were in Palm Desert, Palm Springs, California. They moved to exactly what you're talking about, the shore of the Great Lakes up in Michigan. That's where they're headed. They're going to close that place up. They're headed out of there. So talk about hurricane or the tropical storm. I guess it was Hillary or whatever. That also, again, was something that gave me the heebie-jeebies because that was bizarre. That was unusual. That was a weird one. Tell us about that.
Those are spinning up really fast. It was in the sea surface temperature was in the 90s off the coast of Mexico. Spun up very fast, Hillary, and of course, once it got into cooler water, it became a tropical storm. But once again, we've had those type of storms quite frequently through the years, but this one was bigger. It had a longer track and probably arises more frequently.
Yeah, and again, it's human nature to think things will naturally get better, and that may have been true at one time, but I tell folks, these instances, these occurrences are not caused by anything natural. This ain't natural, folks, and what you're seeing, you're probably going to see again and again and again, and it's going to become progressively worse. Okay, so what can we do? Well, here I found an article. I'm going to read some of this. This is out of the Washington Examiner. I'll take my sources anywhere I can get it. They're usually thought of as being conservative or kind of a right-wing publication, I think. But the Washington Examiner thinks as extreme conditions continue with little end in sight, here's a look at what actions President Biden could take on climate. The National Emergencies Act. As President Biden does have the power to declare a climate emergency. That's what we were talking about under the National Emergencies Act, a 1976 federal law that would give him the authority to take additional actions to curb climate change and in certain cases circumvent Congress in making decisions such as unilaterally limiting drilling and fossil fuels. This would likely be met with intense opposition from Republicans in Congress, but climate and environmental groups have been adamant that taking such a step is necessary to deal with the scale of current changes. And I know, Doc, you don't get too much into this political stuff, but you and yours, is this something that they're calling for?
Yeah, I think that these are desperate times for many people, like in Maui, and declaring some kind of emergency on the part of the government, I think, would show that we're in a new era here, and we really have to respond. Good things are happening. Just look at the in Iowa with the wind power. We need to match that up with the solar power. People are making money off this, George. This is jobs. This is our future, but it's got to happen faster. We're not moving fast enough.
Yeah, maybe that's the final thing that we got to come away with here. Now, this Washington Examiner article goes on to talk about the Defense Production Act. Biden could also opt to use powers granted under the Defense Protection Act to boost the manufacturing of renewable energy and clean energy technologies, relying on the same authorities used by former President Donald Trump to jumpstart production of medical supplies during the COVID-19 pandemic. That's what it was used for then, but now address the climate with that. But the White House press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, insisted that Biden has prioritized clean energy manufacturing since day one, pointing last week to the use of the DPA to boost heat pump manufacturing and build out the U.S. power grid. Biden has called it an emergency since day one, she insisted, adding that he sees it as an existential threat of our times. The Inflation Reduction Act. Okay, I wanted to bring this up because this gets a lot of play. A lot of people can recall this. There was a lot of money given via the Inflation Reduction Act. But here's kind of and this highlighting is mine here. This is from Speaking Security. This is from Stephen Semler's website. He points out that $369 billion for climate-related activities is a big number. That was the number in the Inflation Reduction Act, but not when it's spread out over 10 years, which is under the IRA. Yeah, it's $369. It's over 10 years. So let's take a look at this, Doc. This gives me the heebie-jeebies too. This is climate funding, and the Inflation Reduction Act is 4% the size of the Pentagon budget each year. There's the Pentagon budget on the left, and then look at that little smidge of green down there. That's what the Inflation Reduction Act, this is our priorities. This is our focus. Maybe we're going to end with this one. This has got to change, Doc. We've got to start prioritizing our own survival and way of life for ourselves, our children, and our grandchildren instead of policing the planet, funding military bases, and blowing people up around the world. I'm a lefty, but there's no doubt that this ratio seen in that bar chart's got to change.
I'm with you, George.
Yeah, I appreciate that, pal. Well, we've got to send him on his way, as we said. I like to give him last word here because I have a tendency to cover a lot of things here. We go through a lot of information, and he gets to jump in once in a while. Is there any overarching thing that you'd like to leave us with? Again, maybe for people like me that are out on the window ledge, Doc, or maybe we need to be out there. What's your final word here?
Well, there is an upside, and the upside is that this is the way we're going to create wealth and prosperity for the future by responding to climate change, but we have to go faster. And if we respond, we will eventually be able to reduce the carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere, and that will bring down temperature, but it's gonna take decades, to be honest with you. And we haven't seen the worst yet. That's why we have to go faster than we are right now.
I tell people the solution to this, or finding the solution, or making it happen, maybe, in my lifetime, it's been young people. Now, you're dealing with young people all the time in the university setting out there. Do you see a sea change with young people? Are they becoming more knowledgeable, engaged, and alarmed? Or are they the solution here?
Well, I hope so. I would say that of my students, something like 90% are quite activist about these issues that we're talking about. Of course, I don't see everybody, and only about half of the students go to college. So I don't know, George, but my feeling is that in general, that generation feels like they've kind of been shafted, by us, by the boomers.
Yeah.
And there's some truth to that, and they want change. So let's hope that happens.
Well, that's a great. Now we've got a couple of minutes here. We've got time to play this. This is from. This is Climate Defiance. These are college-age students. Exactly what the doc is talking about here. This is them disrupting, which is what they're doing. This is their MO. This is what they're doing. They're disrupting these politicians. Watch this. You'll recognize this politician. This is what they're doing.
Excuse me, Madam Vice President Kamala Harris. We are in a climate emergency, and in the midst of a climate emergency, 80 people have died in Hawaii. 80 people have died. Thousands are displaced due to the climate chaos. And when we were there, we were wondering, yes, I hear you, but the planet is burning and people are dying. The planet is burning and people are dying, and we're wondering if you uphold your promises. And then we're in the middle of a climate.
So there you go, and that young man's being headed out of there. But they're doing that mostly out on the eastern seaboard. They're out of the Boston area, I think. And that's not the whole answer, don't get me wrong, but that is part of it. I mean, and I like to see that because you can see people in that crowd. They're there to hear that speech. Yeah, what's that speech going to be about? What's that going to accomplish? I mean, that's just political gingerbread. That young man's there to talk about his future, his planet, what he's going to inherit. And right now, it's all in danger, Doc.
That's a fitting end, I think. We should applaud that kind of protest because I think it's needed in order to get real government action.
Ah, that's great. We're going to let him go, folks. Doc, thanks again. As always, you're a champ for coming on here, the podcast by George Liveline.
Thanks, George.
Yeah, folks. And if you like seeing Dr. Jerry Schnoor getting this type of insight, being able to ask questions, get answers from this guy is a world-renowned expert. He spent his life devoted to this. There ain't anybody that knows more about what we're talking about today than Dr. Jerry Schnoor. Well, subscribe to Podcast by George. You'll see him every time I've got him on. If you subscribe at podcastbygeorge.com, clicking on the YouTube badge or button, whatever you want to call it there, sign up on YouTube. It'll take you right to my homepage. You can subscribe, ring the notification bell, leave a thumbs up on YouTube. Facebook has a button there. You can click on that, follow us, like us there. Great way to get the video live streams on both of those platforms. And then, of course, if you just like to listen to audio, and I get that when you're out traveling about in your car, on your bike, jogging, walking, whatever the case might be, iTunes is there, Spotify, the iHeartRadio app, Amazon Music, all those types of places. You can click buttons and go right to those homes and subscribe there just as well. But folks, that is going to do it. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is, and there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.